Good morning. Welcome to the Community Voice. I'm Steve Gradick, your host. Delighted to have you with us. Before we get started this morning, we have a very special program on tap for you this morning, but we have some business to take care of. It's part of the Random Christmas Trivia Cash Giveaway promotion that's ongoing right now. And the question for this morning is, in the movie Ernest Saves Christmas, how old does Santa claim to be? In the movie Ernest Saves Christmas, how old does Santa claim to be? So when you figure that one out, go to newstalk1330.com and put your guess or answer into the proper spot, and hopefully you'll be a winner. We're very honored to have in studio today General Charles Wilhelm. He's a four-star General of the United States Marine Corps, retired and a resident of Carroll County. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Steve.
As you would expect, a four-star general who's the highest-ranking resident of Carroll County has a exemplary resume and bio. And because of it's such, I'm going to actually take the 2 to 3 minutes it takes to read it, because it certainly, I think, warrants it. General Wilhelm held a variety of command positions. He commanded a rifle platoon and company during 2 tours in Vietnam, served as a company commander in Headquarters Battalion and 3rd Battalion, 8th Marine, 2nd Marine Division, was a senior advisor to a Vietnamese Army Battalion, inspector instructor, 4th Reconnaissance Battalion, deputy provost marshal, U.S. Naval Forces Philippines, and commanded the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit. General Wilhelm's staff assignments include Assistant Battalion Operations Officer, and Executive Officer, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. He served on the staffs of the 3rd Marine Amphibious Force, Logistics, Plans, and Policy Branch, Installations and Logistics Department, Headquarters Marine Corps, and J3 Headquarters, U.S. European Command. In August 1988, while assigned as the Assistant Chief of Staff for Operations, 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force, he was promoted to Brigadier General and was subsequently assigned as the Director of Operations, Headquarters Marine Corps. In July 1990, he was selected to serve as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Policy Missions, Office of Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict. General Wilhelm assumed duties as Commanding General, 1st Marine Division in July 1992. He served as Commander, Marine Forces Somalia from December 1992 to March 93 as part of the U.S.-led coalition in Operation Restore Hope. General Wilhelm was confirmed for promotion to Lieutenant General and assumed duties as the Commanding General, Marine Corps Combat Development Command, Quantico, Virginia, July 15, 1994. In August 1995, he was assigned as Commander, U.S. Marine Corps Forces, Atlantic Commanding General, Fleet Marine Force, Atlantic Commander, U.S. Marine Corps Forces, Europe Commander, U.S. Marine Corps Forces, South Commanding General, 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force, Commanding General, Marine Striking Force, Atlantic, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. He was confirmed for promotion to General and assumed duties as the Commander, U.S. Southern Command on September 25, 1997. He served in this position until October 2000. General Wilhelm retired from the Marine Corps on November 1st in the year 2000. And of course, sir, and on behalf of the audience, thank you for all your service.
Well, it's an honor to serve, Steve, and thank you for including me this morning.
The reason both of us are here this morning is we always, whether it's D-Day or Veterans Day or Memorial Day, we always try to remember the special significance of this day. And this day is probably as significant, if not more so, than all others. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a surprise military strike by the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service upon the United States against the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Honolulu territory of Hawaii just before 8 a.m. So that was the local time on December 7th, 1941, 81 years ago. The attack commenced at 7:48 a.m. Hawaiian time, and the base was attacked by 353 Imperial Japanese aircraft, including fighters, level and dive bombers, and torpedo bombers in 2 waves, launched from 6 aircraft carriers, Of the 8 U.S. Navy battleships present, all were damaged, all with 4 sunk. All but the USS Arizona was later raised, and 6 were returned to service and went on to fight in the war. The Japanese also sank and damaged 3 cruisers, 3 destroyers, an anti-aircraft training ship, and 1 mine layer. More than 180 U.S. aircraft were destroyed, 2,403 Americans were killed, and 1,178 others were wounded. I've had the honor of touring and being there at the Arizona Memorial and touring Pearl Harbor and Hickam Air Base. General, when you think back on this very significant morning in Honolulu, and on your reflections on World War II and the greatest generation, what are some of your thoughts?
Well, first, I'm glad that you linked World War II and you linked the 7th of December of 1941 with the greatest generation, because those are inseparable. Dates come and go. The greatest generation is leaving us now, and it's very important that we remember who was there. For my own part, a few reflections about Pearl Harbor Day and the events that took place on the date that will forever live in infamy, as it was so cogently described by our serving president at the time. I think to really understand and appreciate the significance of Pearl Harbor, assuming you have the means, it's best to make your way to Hawaii, go to the harbor, and take a launch out to the Arizona Memorial, just as you did, Steve. When you're standing on the memorial, you suddenly realize that you are standing about 40 feet above the tomb of 1,102 men who went down with their ship. On what they thought was just another pleasant Sunday on a beautiful Pacific island. I think numbers can be deceiving. They're impersonal, merely statistics, like your bank balance, assuming you still have one at this time of the year. No, these men were not statistics. They had fathers and mothers, they had wives, they had sons and daughters, they had brothers and sisters, they had other relatives and friends. All of those people's lives were changed by a single evil and unprovoked act. And when we think about that, I think it's useful to scratch the surface of history and see what's underneath. And just one observation I would offer about the architect of that attack. That attack was planned and initiated from the Japanese aircraft carrier Nagato by Hiroshiko Nagato, Fleet Admiral. An interesting fact about Admiral Nagato, among other things, he was a student at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the Arizona wasn't the only victim of the Japanese attack, and that wasn't the only place where Americans and others died on that Sunday morning. In all, over 2,400 people lost their lives as a result of that attack. And as a result, the United States was finally drawn into a war that ultimately resulted in the deaths of somewhere between 50 and 70 million people. So today, as we pause to reflect on the events of 7 November 1941, I think it's appropriate to ask ourselves, what have we really learned about this? My first observation would be that there's a real danger in being unprepared. Okay, so we recognize that there was a lesson there, but did we apply the lesson? I think the answer is yes and no. On the 11th of September in 2001, another event occurred, a catastrophic event, which in some respects runs very closely parallel to what occurred 81 years before in Hawaii. And of course, what I'm speaking about is an attack conducted by 19 individuals with what I believe was a very deranged view of what God and religion are all about, against 3 buildings and a vacant field that resulted in the deaths of 3,000 innocent people. And they weren't just all Americans, keeping in mind that the primary targets were the World Trade Center. Citizens of no less than 90 countries lost their lives that day. So you, I guess, could make the observation that perhaps we didn't apply the lessons that had been learned at Pearl Harbor. I don't agree with that. All coins have 2 sides. Now, that's the negative side of the coin. On the positive side of the coin, many of us have no knowledge whatsoever of many other attacks that were thwarted by those who defend our homeland 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The details about how those attacks were thwarted cannot be provided to us, because if we did, we'd disclose the means, the resources, and the sources of information that allowed those who defend and protect us to thwart the attacks. But they are many, and they are varied. And so we did learn a great deal from that. Something else that I think we learned, and I hope that we realized it about ourselves all along, is that we're a people who don't forget. And, a thought occurred to me, and I'll go back to 1987. I was a colonel at the time, commanding the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit. We were embarked on 5 ships of the United States Navy. I had about 2,500 Marines and about 3 dozen airplanes, and we were headed out to the Western Pacific on a deployment for 6 months. On the way to the outer reaches of the Pacific, we passed through Hawaii, which was the headquarters of the United States Pacific Command. It was customary and required for all units deploying into the region to stop in Hawaii and get our final orders from the commander of U.S. Pacific Command, and that we did. As we steamed into Pearl Harbor, we followed a Navy tradition. We did something called manning the rails. Mm-hmm. Every person embarked on the ship put on the most formal uniform that he had deployed with, and we stood at attention along the rail of the ship as we passed the Arizona Memorial and rendered a hand salute, paying homage to the 1,102 brave men who were entombed in that vessel beneath the surface of the water. Young Marines and sailors and soldiers and airmen are unique creatures. They will undertake the most difficult and dangerous task and never complain at all. But tell them to do something really simple, and they will bitch and moan for hours on end. I can tell you with absolute candor, I did not hear one single complaint among those thousands of Marines and sailors manning the rails on the ships that day. Bringing this forward, people that never forget, Osama bin Laden learned 10 years after the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon that we didn't forget. Now, that recollection only lasted for him a few seconds, but we did not forget, and we don't forget. So those are just a few observations about Pearl Harbor then and now, lessons learned and applied or not applied.
Our guest this morning is General Charles Wilhelm, 4-star General, United States Marine Corps, retired and a resident of Carroll County. We have, over the years, brought in members of the greatest generation to reflect on Pearl Harbor, but sadly, as time moves on, they are passing away also, and so the General has agreed to come in and share his thoughts. In their honor this morning, we're going to take a break. We're on Facebook Live on the News Talk 1330 Facebook page. If you have any questions or comments, and we're going to come back and talk with more with the General after these words.
Health is a journey. It's making better choices, even when it's not easy. It's taking care of yourself and the people you love. At Tanner Health System, we're there for you with every step, with primary care, heart care, cancer care, women's care, orthopedics, surgical services, and so much more. We're dedicated to helping you live and feel your best. So let's get on that journey to health. You've got places to be for many years to come. Find us at tanner.org.
I'm Michael Flynn, Oak Mountain Academy class of 1978.
Katie Flynn, class of 2010.
Justin Flynn, class of 2014.
Logan Flynn, class of 2019.
And I'm Marnie Flynn, current teacher at OMA.
My uncle Richard Orm Flynn, a founding father of Oak Mountain Academy, had a vision to see students become confident leaders who hold a faith-based value system in an academically rigorous environment. We are proud to celebrate 60 years of fulfilling my uncle's vision.
Our family invites you to visit the campus or oakmountain.us today.
Good morning. Welcome back to the Community Voice. I'm Steve Gradick, your host. Delighted to have you with us this morning. We're honored to have in studio General Charles Wilhelm, a Carroll County resident, 4-star General of the United States Marine Corps, and retired, but a resident of the highest-ranking military officer in Carroll County. We're honored to have him in studio, and you're probably sitting there going, how in the world did Gradick get General Wilhelm to come in? Well, the answer is I met him at the Veterans Service at the Veterans Memorial Park, and as I'm wont to do, I put a microphone right in front of his face, and he didn't flinch. So it was a great time that day, and I was proud to invite him to be able to come on Community Voice, and we were able to work it out on this very important day as we remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice at Pearl Harbor. But yes, General, it was, I think at the Veterans Park, we immediately started talking about the strengths and weaknesses of a volunteer force. So we might want to go there right now and get your further thoughts on that.
I agree, Steve. It's good to go from past history to the here and now. Just a brief aside, if I might,
sure,
about our meeting at the Carroll County Veterans Memorial Park. As you and your listeners might imagine, I've been called upon on a number of occasions to speak at special events commemorating Memorial Day, Veterans Day, Independence Day, days of historic significance to our country that have their roots in many respects in the military. During those events, I've had an opportunity to really observe and in some cases admire the memorials that have been erected by communities in recognition of the services performed by our military. And I would tell you this, Carrollton is and Carroll County are wonderful places. But I have been to much larger cities with deeper pockets, and I viewed their memorial parks. And I will tell you, many of them could not hold a candle to what the residents and citizens of Carroll County and Carrollton have done here. There was a popular 5-word phrase, I think it kind of came into vogue during the long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, 5 words: thank you for your service. For the 19 million veterans who are part of our population, I would tell you that those sentiments were appreciated, but they're words. Words are spoken like these, and they disappear into the air. At the Carroll County Veterans Memorial Park, those words are chiseled into granite. They don't disappear into the air. They endure, and they really influence, I think, the attitudes and the actions, and in many cases, I think, augment the patriotism of many, many people for years to come. So it's just sort of my way of saying I feel privileged to be a resident of Carroll County, and I was gratified to be permitted to attend the Veterans Day observances at the Memorial Park. So well done, Carroll County, and well done, Carrollton.
Speaking of the Memorial Park, when I see those who made the ultimate sacrifice and who gave up their lives so that we could live in freedom and safety. It's almost hard to fathom. Your entire life you've sacrificed for this. In being in service, rising to the rank of general. I mean, you've seen a lot of young men and service people who are no longer with us. When you think about them, or you see a picture of them, or you see their name on a wall, what kind of thoughts and emotions does that evoke with you?
As you would imagine, the thoughts and emotions are pretty profound. At a certain point in time, you're the person that issued the order that sent the young man, or in some cases young woman, up the hill or into the air on a mission from which they did not return. Mm-hmm. And you have to carry that around with you. Now, you're just a small cog in a much larger machine, but ultimately there are things called responsibility and accountability. And I will tell you, when you think about lives lost, and I can see the faces in front of me right now of so many of them, the weight is pretty heavy. Yeah. But you have to realize that these young people made the sacrifice willingly. They didn't do it with a gun at their back. They signed their name willingly to an enlistment contract, or they raised their hand and took an oath of enlistment or an oath of office, and they willingly went forward to serve their country. And they gave the gift that, as we say, can only be given once. So those thoughts, really always crossed my mind. And I guess as I became elderly and increased in rank, and I was asked questions that, quite frankly, I wasn't all that comfortable with, it was frequently hard to get the media to turn their attention away from casualties, which we prefer really not to discuss, particularly those in uniform who are performing operational missions. But I did hit upon one theme that I never deviated from. My statement was that there are two words that I will never use in the same sentence, and those two words are light and casualties. There are no such things as light casualties. Every time a young man or a young woman falls in defense of their nation and in protection of its citizens, those are the heaviest casualties imaginable to that young person's mother, father, wife, husband, son, or daughter.
You touched on it a couple of times. When I became of age, of draft age, I should say, the draft was ending. We still had to register, but the draft was ending. And ever since then, we've had an all-volunteer force. What are the strengths and weaknesses, if any, of an all-volunteer force as opposed to having a draft, as many countries do?
Steve, in my view, the strengths are many and the weaknesses are few. I think it's probably wise to kind of dissect the force that we have today. Right now, we have just a little over 2,250,000 men and women in the armed forces, either in the active component, the reserve components, or the National Guard. Now, that is 2.25 million people in uniform, drawn from a population of 32 million. So if you do the math, that's just a little bit more than 2/3 of 1%.
You said 32, you mean 320 million? Say that again. Drawn from a population of 320 million?
332 million.
332 million. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Checking my math?
Yeah, I was. Go ahead.
Which is, as I mentioned, it's just a little bit above 2/3 of 1%.
Okay.
These people serve in an all-volunteer force. Now, how did all this come about? Vietnam was a very, very difficult time for this country. At the time, it was our longest war, and I think today it remains probably our most unpopular war and is frequently referred to in those terms. That war imposed some unique strains and stresses on our armed forces. It was fought with a largely conscripted force. These were people whose ping pong balls were drawn in a lottery process, and they were drafted into the armed forces. They did not volunteer. They were told, you must serve, and they received a notification to that effect. The force that came out of Vietnam had some flaws. There's no question about it. A lot of the people who had served brought back some bitter memories, and those memories became even more bitter at the reception they received when they returned home. They had done their bit. They had done the things they were ordered to do. They had served as best they could, and they were reviled for their efforts. I think we turned an important corner in 1973 when then Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird signed documents that created what we referred to as the AVF, the All-Volunteer Force. As time went on, those of us in uniform kind of added a word to that. We said the Professional All-Volunteer Force. It really changed the character of our armed forces in a lot of different ways. We learned that quality is really not a function of numbers. A senior officer who I admired greatly once made the simple statement, it's not how many they are, it's who they are. And so the all-volunteer force went after the very best and brightest people who we could attract to service. And it took sacrifices on the part of the nation to do that. We had to construct a system of pay and allowances that would attract people to the armed forces. We had to create opportunities in the armed forces that would cause people to want to join. But we had to also set standards for admission. And the standards for admission had to be enforced. And we required a much longer period of service. Draftees routinely serve for about 2 years. But warfare, like everything else, evolves. It becomes more technologically oriented. Tactics, techniques, and procedures become more complex. It requires young people with greater maturity and a higher level of education to serve effectively. So we went to a minimum period of service of 4 years. We learned that in 2 years, by the time we had accomplished the training necessary to make a young man or woman an effective member of a unit, it was time to discharge them. With the increased periods of service, we were able to, one, effectively use the training that we had provided, and two, with the modern all-volunteer force, our ability to retain people had improved markedly as well. Now, as we look at the force today, what do we see? We see a battle-hardened force. If you look at the careers, Steve read my biography, and one thing about long biographies, they lead you to the conclusion, man, this guy's really old. But if you look at
I didn't have that thought, but go ahead.
if you look at the records of service of today's senior officers and senior non-commissioned officers, these men and women have been at war for 20 years, whether Afghanistan, Iraq, and in many cases, if not most, in both. No other country on earth can describe a military force in those terms. And, I'm always drawn to comparisons. I've always said you can't recognize good if you've never seen bad. And I think back again to my own history. I joined the United States Marine Corps in 1963, signed my name on the dotted line, and for 25 years thereafter, I worried day and night, 7 days a week, about the armed forces of the group of forces under the Soviet Union. They were massive. They were massive forces. And I frequently asked myself, if we fire every weapon effectively and every round hits its target, we'll run out of rounds before they run out of targets. So that puts you in a bit of a quandary. And so for all the way up until 1991, when the Berlin Wall came down, that was something that we lived with and we worried about. And over the last better part of a year now, we've seen the successor to that force in Ukraine. And what we've seen is a conscripted force. I'm not going to say it was like the one we had during Vietnam, but a conscripted force nonetheless. We've seen generals that can't lead. We've seen privates that won't follow. And we've seen a debacle. There was, if you look at the numbers, there was no reason to believe that Russian forces could not overwhelm Ukraine in a matter of weeks, if not a few months. But we saw resolute people, the Ukrainian forces, who offered stern resistance, and we saw the failure of this conscripted force composed of non-professional members and how it failed when stressed under combat. And we don't know what the outcome will be, but I think what we've seen thus far has certainly told us a lot. Now, how do we go about, and this is today's challenge, how do we go about preserving and sustaining the professional all-volunteer force? Well, as the man said, it ain't easy. We've already said that we only need about 2/3 of 1% of the total population of this country, but we have to extract that force from a relatively confined audience. We define that audience as QMA. We always have an acronym for everything. QMA is Qualified Military Applicant. A qualified military applicant, by definition, is a young man or woman between the ages of 17 years and 24 years. Now, you would think, well, that's a pretty sizable chunk of population. This should be a walk in the park. Not so. I mentioned standards. Our standards are high, and thus far, our armed forces, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, Coast Guard, have really marked by those standards. It's alarming to me. Depending on which study you read, I'm going to use a number that strikes somewhere in the middle. 3 out of every 10 young people between the ages of 17 and 24 can qualify to serve in today's professional all-volunteer force. The question arises, what's the problem? Well, the problem primarily resides in 3 areas. Area number 1, obesity and other related health conditions. Our population of young people are not physically fit. They cannot meet the minimum standards of our armed forces for enlistment. The second problem that arises is their academic qualification. We have something that we call the ASVAB, the Armed Services, it's a vocational aptitude battery. There we determined, does this young person have the listening, reading, writing, and arithmetic skills to function effectively in a technologically enabled, sophisticated force? And the answer is, in all too many cases, no, they cannot. So we fail at the academic level. That drives us to other conclusions about maybe some need for some reforms in our system of education. And then finally, we have involvement with civil authorities, which was what we call criminal behavior. So when we winnow all of that out, 3 out of every 10 can qualify. Does that mean that they're permanently unable to serve? No. We have things like delayed entry programs where our recruiters take young people who fail the first time to meet those 3 tests. They work with them long and hard. They really, in essence, make them better qualified people and bring them up to a standard where they can be enlisted. But it's getting harder, day by day, week by week. So much depends on the other conditions that exist within the country. What's the state of the economy? COVID-19 has created some very significant problems. Right now, it looks as though we may hopefully be turning the corner on some of our economic, on some of the economic conditions that have plagued us. And when the civilian economy is pulsating, it's harder to attract young people to this lifestyle.
We're going to continue this conversation, unfortunately, another day. We've run out of time. And I want to thank you so much, General Wilhelm, for coming in. I do hope we can bring you back one day, because I've got tons and tons of questions. But you know, the reason we came in today is worthwhile, in that we remembered this morning 81 years ago. And again, thank you, sir, for coming in. Fascinating discussion. I was really totally blown away by it. And I hope we can do this again sometime.
Oh, Steve, the pleasure was entirely mine. And
sponsors for sponsoring the Community Voice, thank you for listening. Go out and make it a great day. Remember the Toys for Tots, and we wish the very best to the championship football teams who are playing this week. Thank you for listening. You're in tune to WLBB Carrollton.